uh, I'm at Sabarmati Ashram, which is in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and today it's September 2nd. A few days ago, I had actually done a video at Ashram, which is some kilometers from here, and it's the ashram where Gandhi had first established himself when he returned from South Africa in January 1915, and he established himself in that ashram for several months. In fact, it's actually a period of 2 years before he moved to Sabarmati Ashram, which began operating on June 17th, 1917. It's important to add here, before I get into further details about the history of the ashram and some of its more unusual characteristics, that Gandhi himself was not present in June 1917 when this ashram was opened, because he was at that point in Champaran, where he was leading what is known as the Champaran Satyagraha. Now this ashram became Gandhi's home, principal home, from 1917 until the morning of March 12, 1930, when Gandhi set out on what is known as the Dandi March, on which I have done a number of videos. When he left the ashram on March 12, 1930, Gandhi took a vow that he would not return to this ashram until India had attained its independence, which of course happened on 15th August 1947. Gandhi, in fact, survived only another 6 months after independence, because he was assassinated, as is widely known, on 30th January 1948. Gandhi never did return to the ashram. And I want to just simply summarize the history of the ashram itself before I move on to some of what I have mentioned, some of its more interesting and unusual aspects. If we look at the subsequent history of the ashram from 1930 onwards, so in 1933, the ashram had been in fact turned over to the Harijan Sevak Sangh, that is the Harijan Ashram Trust, and this is an organization that was set up to basically promote the welfare of the Harijans, also known as untouchables, and known in India now for many of the last previous decades as Dalits. So the activities at this ashram subsided considerably after the Salt March, but the ashram continued to live on. And where I'm speaking now from now is not in fact actually part of the original ashram. It is within the complex of the Sabarmati Ashram, but this is in fact the museum, which was in fact the work of this museum was started in the late 1950s. Its architect is one of the most famous Indian architects by the name of Charles Fourier, and this museum was inaugurated by Jawaharlal Nehru, then Prime Minister of India, in 1963. And where I'm standing and speaking from, and the video that you're seeing gives you a little bit idea of the outlay of this particular museum. The original ashram buildings are on that side, and we will have a little look at those buildings later on in a subsequent video. Let's go back to the ashram. One of the things that I pointed out in my companion video on the culture of ashram is that the idea of this ashram has a very long history in Indian thought and Indian traditions. But as is true of many other kinds of engagements that Gandhi had with institutions that already have a history in India, such as the ashram, or if we think about other kinds of practices, for example, what is called the wrought, or the fast, right, and the vow. If one sort of takes a comprehensive look at Gandhi's idea of the vow and looks at what he did with the fast, what discerns is a particular way in which Gandhi rethought these ideas, these practices, these traditions, and created a new kind of history around them. Now, this is, I think, what is true of the ashram, because the ashram in India has traditionally been a place where the guru imparted a set of teachings to his students in person, or a place that often is viewed as, to use the English word, a kind of a hermitage, a place to which a person who is disposed to philosophical thinking, or a person who's disposed to the idea of renunciation, somebody who wants to escape from the tribulations, the difficulties of life, they retreat to a place called an ashram. Well, this is very different than the Sabarmati Ashram or the Satyagraha Ashram. So the ashram at Kochra was initially named the Satyagraha Ashram, and that name carried on to the Sabarmati Ashram. In fact, if one looks at the displays here at the museum here, it doesn't really give the earlier history of the Satyagraha Ashram, which begins at Kochra. Before that history then moves on to Sabarmati itself, right? But what is most interesting, of course, is that this ashram becomes the center, in many ways, of political life in India from 1917 until the Salt March. Right? So all of India gravitated towards the center, the political leaders, the people associated with the Congress, and of course, it's also the case that there were visitors coming from overseas, and so at this particular ashram hosted, among many others, people of the likes of course, not simply Jawaharlal Nehru, but people like Rabindranath Tagore, who came to this ashram at least on 2 different occasions and stayed at the ashram on at least one occasion. And the hut where he stayed, or that building, that small building, is called Nandini. It had a great many other distinguished visitors as well from many parts of the world. But what I'm trying to suggest here is that Gandhi, it's not so much the case that he secularized the idea of the ashram. I mean, some people might be inclined to view it that way. Quite to the contrary, the ashram retained certain kinds of spiritual features. The daily prayer meeting, both in the morning and in the evening, was held regularly every day, and there were a set of what we can describe as ashram observances, which I'll turn to in just a moment. Right? So there is that aspect of it, but the idea is not to entirely cut off the ashram from everyday life. To the contrary, the ashram is very much part of what is going to begin to develop as the city of Ahmedabad, that is the modern city of Ahmedabad, but it is also the center of, as I've said, political activity in India. Right? So this is not a place that is detached from everyday life, from the public sphere, from political life. It's not simply that the ashram was very much a part of that. The ashram, in fact, actually created a certain tenor of public life, I would argue. This is a very distinct argument that I'm making when I suggest that the ashram plays a critical role in creating a certain tenor of public life. I don't think that we necessarily want to be thinking about the Habermasian kind of notion of the public sphere here, but it is unquestionably the case that this is a place that is both public and private. It's private and it's political. It's secular in the sense that people from all walks of life are welcome here, so long as they're willing to observe the rules of the ashram, right? But it is not secular in the sense that it is disassociated from the idea of religious life, religious practices. Right? right? And this is where we see that Gandhi breaks down all the distinctions that have become common to the vocabulary of the modern, right? So the vocabulary of the modern needs to make clear-cut distinctions between public and private, between religion and the idea of the secular, the idea of work and leisure. So the people who were staying here were people who partook of everyday activities, right? So you had to sweep, you had to work in the ashram workshop. There is a kitchen here. People are actively involved in all of these activities, right? And in fact, one of the reasons why Gandhi moved here, apart from the fact that there was a problem at Kochram, the problem was that Kochram had become unsafe because it had been hit by the plague, and Gandhi wanted therefore to move to a new location. This ashram didn't exist, it was built from scratch, and it was built by the people who became part of the ashram, right? So this is what I mean, that labor was very much important, physical labor, and this is another distinction that Gandhi brought down, the distinction between physical labor, which in India is often associated only with the lower castes, and the life of the mind, the work of the mind. Gandhi wanted to break that down entirely, right? So, but one of the things that he wanted to do here was to actually have a place where you could pursue animal husbandry, dairy farming, have some cattle here, and indeed all of this became part of the life of the ashram, right? So I think that when we begin to think about the complexity of this ashram, we begin to see that Gandhi is doing something which is very radical and very much in keeping with, of course, the thinking that is so characteristic of him. I'm not venturing here into the much earlier history, which is important because I mentioned that in my companion videos on the Kochram Ashram. And that is the history in South Africa, where Gandhi had first toyed with the idea of, if one uses that expression, communal living, right? So he had set up, we know, the Phoenix settlement, which is just on the outskirts of what is now Durban. And of course there was Tolstoy Farm, which was set up in Johannesburg. And we know that he had patrons there. We know that Herman Kallenbach, Henry Pollack were his patrons in South Africa. Kallenbach in particular had donated much of the money that was needed to set up those establishments there. And similarly, Gandhi had donors here in India, which made it possible, in Ahmedabad, which made it possible to actually buy this piece of land and then build this ashram from scratch. It took 2 years to do that because the ashram was established, as I said, in 1917. And really it was in 1919 or thereabouts that the principal buildings, so 5 or 6 buildings that were part of the original ashram, were established by then. And so this is a brief accounting of the Sabarmati Ashram, a place to which, as I said, everybody came who mattered in Indian politics, certainly from 1920 onwards, when Gandhi became unquestionably the undisputed leader of the Indian National Congress. I should say really the undisputed leader of the movement for independence and self-determination, because ironically Gandhi was not a due-paying member of the Congress Party after 1925. So in that sense he was not the formal leader of the Congress, but he was of course the person who is principally associated with the struggle for self-determination. And so the ashram has this centrality in Indian political life until, as I said, the time that Gandhi sets out for Dandi on March 12, 1930. And in the companion video to this one, I'm going to discuss some other aspects of the nature of this ashram, and in particular I want to dwell upon what are known as the ashram observances and the vows that everyone had to take.